Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next webinar in our series of Energy Manager 101 and 201. If you're new to the series, my name is Tom Diliberti, and I'm here with Energy Cap. And I'd like to just give it a couple minutes to give those late arrivers an opportunity to pop in. Yeah, as we start our day today, just the normal housekeeping items. Please use the question and answers option within the software to ask your questions, so that I am a former teacher, so I'm very comfortable answering questions as I go through a presentation. But please use that tool. Could you also maybe take a second to introduce yourself through the chat? We'd love to find out who's joining us today. Okay. Just stalling for a couple minutes to giving people a chance to get settled. So again, we're here today to talk about the role the energy manager can play with bringing his or her organization together and trying to be that bridge between facilities, finance, and the ESG teams. So during the presentation today, what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes early on talking about the priorities and responsibilities each of these groups of people play within the organization. So I want to talk about the facilities and operations, finance, ESG, and energy manager teams or people and what they do. One of the messages that hopefully comes through loud and clear in today's webinar is that in order to start this process of change and really get the most benefit from trying to save energy and ultimately become more efficient, is you really need to understand where others are coming from. We get so busy in our world and so overwhelmed with stuff, we tend to forget the other people that are working hard within our organizations and what their priorities are. And it's a constant theme that you'll see throughout the conversation today, that we have to be cognizant of what others are doing and allow us all to move to a better place. So after talking about those priorities, what I want to suggest that we do is talk about an energy committee, and we'll talk about what that looks like and who should be on it. The role of energy policy and guidelines in helping an organization to make improvements. And then finishing the presentation with creating a culture of energy savings and sharing the successes and talking about some of those things that really need to be a consistent part of what you do in order to have long-term success. So let's jump in and let's begin to talk about the facilities and operations department. And I want to blow through these slides pretty quickly because I think for the most part, my assumption is many people on the call have a pretty good sense for what the facility and operations department is doing. But I want you just to pay attention long enough and recognize that there's a lot here. There's a lot of things that the facilities department is always thinking about, things that are on their mind, their challenges, and take enough time to appreciate that as we contrast these with these others, because you'll see there's a pretty long list for each of these different groups within the organization. So first and foremost, the facilities and operations team is developing and implementing long-range plans for their facilities or upgrades, renovations, and new construction. What that means is there's a lot going on. There's a lot of vendors and a lot of things happening around the organization, constant meetings that are taking place. And so it consumes a lot of the team's time. They're managing the facilities budget, looking at capital expenditures and operational costs. So there's always juggling money and trying to make things work out with budgets. They're overseeing preventive maintenance programs. They're managing the space and efficient workflows, trying to make sure everybody within an organization has what they need. A common occurrence that I've seen with universities is the space utilization on a campus and how challenging this could be for those interested in classroom spaces or lab spaces and the other things that are done around a university. And it's a very consuming and overwhelming task to make sure everybody is getting what they need. They direct and supervise maintenance and operations staff, so there's hiring processes that have to take place. There's many people in the chain of command that need to be juggled and taught and trained and developed. It takes time. They have to implement and maintain safety and security procedures, huge responsibilities of theirs. They have to conduct regular inspections to identify and address potential hazards. Like I say, they got to train and hire and evaluate, do performance reviews for people, got to communicate with many layers within the organization. They got to maintain accurate records of this stuff going on. And at the end of the day, the single biggest thing that I've learned about this wonderful group of people is they need to stay focused on people's comfort, making sure that the facilities are safe and clean. And this is really the key element of what drives their actions. And so later in this presentation, we start to talk about the energy benefits and making changes. This is going to be a constant theme for what's on people's minds, is they want to make sure that people are comfortable, they're always safe, and the facilities are clean. And if you've never thought of this before, is everybody is in and out of these facilities making judgments on their cleanliness. If the facilities aren't clean, it really becomes a black mark or a smudge on the facilities team. And so there's a huge emphasis placed on that because people will judge it. And that has nothing to do with energy, but it's a huge part of what's considered in their responsibilities. So transitioning to the next team, the finance department. So once again, just blowing through the list of the key things the finance department is looking at. They're recording and classifying and summarizing transactions. They're preparing financial statements and reconciling accounts. They're doing all this for the purpose of communicating this back to higher ups. They want to talk about budgets and communicate, are we on target? Are we behind target? Are we, is cash flow in a good state, or are we getting behind? So the finance department is constantly looking at the bottom line, making judgments in terms of what the next course of action might be for the organization. And so once again, they are not so much focused on the facilities and the cleanliness or the safety of the facilities. Their narrow focus is on their world of budgets and finance. Layering another group of people, the ESG people, the professionals out there working. These people typically are working to understand and apply ESG frameworks. In doing so, these frameworks are constantly changing. There's always updates and things happening. And so as a steady one of their responsibilities, they have to stay focused on things that are happening and the new stuff that's in the market. They're collecting, they're analyzing, they're interpreting data from various sources. They're identifying risks and opportunities and developing strategies, policies, and targets. They're working on behalf of the organization. And many times what happens is ESG professionals are working either in small teams or they're isolated. They're working individually. And in doing so, it gets very overwhelming because many of these things are very significant things to manage day in and day out. And it just becomes a challenging part of their responsibility because they're communicating performance, they're engaging stakeholders, they're trying to adhere to ethical and legal considerations in making their decisions. And once again, the key point not to get lost here is many times ESG professionals are working in isolation, and that just makes the job very, very difficult. And the fourth group of people I want to talk about today are energy managers. This is something we've explored a little bit in the previous webinars, but just to give you a flavor and remind a little bit what a typical energy manager is doing is they're out there monitoring and analyzing utility data, conducting audits, trying to optimize building operations, adjusting systems, meeting with people, looking for opportunity, probably identifying opportunities in the buildings with mechanical changes and physical building changes that can take place in order to add efficiencies. They're communicating environmental impact. They're managing automation systems. They're looking for real-time energy management strategies where they're trying to take data and change operations in buildings in order to capture savings. Once again, their role is, for the most part, distinctly different than the other roles we've described. And as we roll into the next part of the presentation, once again, I want to remind, it's helpful when you start out and you really try to move towards a state of improved efficiency. You realize everybody that comes into a meeting is coming in from a different perspective. And that's where you have to start. So what I suggest is the way to be the bridge, the way to help your organization achieve more efficiency is to create an energy committee. I think it's different for every organization, but I think an energy committee needs to involve all of the executive leadership team. So it's going to have to include the CEO, the CFO, the director of facilities, if you have a CIO, sustainability leaders, and it may include many others. I would encourage you as you try to bring everybody together to talk about the opportunities in order to become more efficient. I would try to keep the team no more than 12 people if possible. But if the team has to be bigger to include all of the other voices, then you have to do it. But the number one thing before any concerted effort can be made is all of these people have to be in a room to talk about what the priorities are for the organization, because it's the shared discussion and commitment with one another that's going to move the project forward. It's going to help the organization. Another important part of the Energy Committee is the data piece. Having utility data and having other data becomes the shared link. Usually data is shared between the different groups of people, and so that's what connects all of these people. That has to remain in the discussion as the Energy Committee plans and unpacks what the future has in store for how the organization can move forward. Another thing that I would say as this Energy Committee begins to get together is you have to discuss the KPIs, the key things that you are going to monitor, the metrics you're going to use in order to gauge performance, because everything is going to be based on those things. And the leadership team, the CEO might see things differently than the CFO, and might see things different than the director of facilities. And I tried to flesh that out earlier in the presentation when I talked about the responsibilities, because everybody is looking at it through a different lens. This gives people a chance to talk about what is possible and what's reasonable for the organization, to establish timelines in order to put the organization on a path that's attainable. So pausing for a second and just setting the stage. So we know we're trying to bring together a lot of people in order to improve the organization. People with different backgrounds. We're trying to get people into a room, form a committee so people can discuss what's important and what's possible. And then the next question is, what happens next? Where do we move forward? And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to find out from you, in trying to maybe coordinate this within your organization, is your Energy Committee, the people that would be available to you in your organization, how many people would you want to include? Or maybe you've already got something like this. I wanted to get some feedback and find out if people are acting alone, if you're flying solo, or if you're able to work with other small groups of people, because I think it can help you. If you understand where you're at, it might change your course and help you to find the right solution moving forward.
Yeah, and hi everybody. I just wanted to chime in here and let you know we do have a lot of solo flyers. But that being said, all of you are flying solo together. So, I know some of you posted names and stuff in the chat. We do have Eco Champions Community, which is a great place to collaborate and talk about these kinds of things and commiserate sometimes. But yeah, you're not alone in being alone. And that's kind of why Tom is here, to help provide some of those insights as to how to expand your reach within your organizations. But anyways, thank you all for answering your polls. We've got a little bit of everything, but mostly flying solo and 2 to 4. So
so more than half the people fall into that category, which is not uncommon. That it's very consistent with my experiences in the field over the course of years. And so that is anticipated, and that's really why Danielle and I put together this presentation with the hope of helping to build a better understanding and reinforce those good things that are happening there, and build you up a little bit and send you back out and try to make this happen within your organization. So moving on to the next slide, and talking about the next thing after you've got your team, okay, whether you're in a position where you have to do it more solo or you've got a few people.
Moral support coming in here. You need to switch slides.
I know, but it's not working.
Oh, there we go. Energy policy.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, thank you. All right. So what I would say is, when the group of people come together, when you get these people in the same room to have a conversation about trying to become more efficient, the number one thing on the list has to be to develop an energy policy. And what I've written here is, an energy policy is a statement about the organization's commitment to energy. And what I want to talk about over the next 5-10 minutes is something that I call an energy policy and energy guidelines. I treat these as two separate things. You might, in your organization, do it a little bit different, but I think there's a subtle distinction between these things, and I want to try to clarify that in the next couple slides. So in energy policy, again, a statement about the organization's commitment to reduce energy. And I have an example here. So energy is a major expense for organization A, B, and C. We're striving to reduce energy use and to lower energy costs, which also reduces our carbon footprint. All employees are energy users, and we ask that all employees play their part to reduce energy consumption without compromising safety, comfort, and productivity. Now, I wanted to read that because there's some important elements that I think that need to be included as you write an energy policy. One of the things that I feel has to be there is the third sentence that says all employees are energy users. We need to draw out or call out, make sure everybody knows that employees are using energy around an organization, regardless of what that organization is. And it's reasonable to ask all employees to play their part in trying to contribute to the bottom line and helping to save energy. Another important part of this statement, I think, that needs to be included is the idea of the safety, comfort, and productivity. Your effort to try to save energy will fail very quickly if people perceive that anything that's done to save energy is going to compromise safety, comfort, or productivity. And so I think it has to be a guiding principle that ends up in this policy that everybody realizes if that happens through changes that take place in the organization, it wasn't the goal. It was an unintended consequence and it needs to be fixed. And so those are the critical pieces. It's all people have to play in the game, and we're going to do this the right way, and we're not going to make things harder for people. So that's the energy policy. It's a global statement to make sure that everybody hopefully gets on board. The next thing that I want to talk about is Energy Star. You might be looking for an energy policy after what I just described in the last couple minutes. Say, hey, Tom, where can I get an energy policy? And what I want to do is I'm going to direct you to the Energy Star guidelines for energy management. So if you navigate to the Energy Star website, you might you'll very easily be able to find it, or you can follow this link when you get the presentation. But these guidelines, I think, are very well done. And I think they have a couple important components that that you really can use in order to build on for your particular situation. So once you create the energy policy, and this green box that's on the slide right now came right out of the document, I thought it was important, and so I would include it, is the CEO or the head of the organization should officially issue the policy. If an energy policy just comes out of the facility department and does not come from the head of the organization, very likely it's going to struggle to be successful. People within the organization, whether it's a relatively small organization or a large organization, people need to recognize the CEO is committed to the energy reduction effort. So it needs to come from the CEO. And best case scenario is if the energy committee, everybody involved, that group of people, the CFO and facility directors and the other critical people within the organization, they should also be part of the distribution of the policy. Maybe their signatures are there, or it's an email that comes out collectively from the CEO with everybody else's endorsement. But the more people realize that everybody on the leadership team is involved with this and is part of the energy policy, the more people are likely to jump on board and support it. So involve the key people, as I've said, make sure that they get buy-in. Tailor your policy to your culture. I would never recommend that you just take an energy policy that's written, even this Energy Star one, which I think is a good policy. I would say use that as a template, use it as a base, consider it, but then meld it, mold it into what your organization is all about. Make sure it matches your culture, make sure it matches your language so that it has the powerful impact that you need to have. Make sure it's understandable to the employees and the public alike. If people are to see your energy policy online, or it's printed and maybe it's hanging in a poster or somewhere around your organization, like on a wall someplace, wherever it might logically be, it needs to be simple to understand and people need to recognize it and they need to identify with it. Consider the skills and abilities of the management and employees. Don't ask people to do things that aren't possible. Even though there might be energy savings opportunities, make sure your energy policy is written in a way that people can achieve what the goals are. One of the next bullet points here, it says include detail that covers day-to-day operations. That part, even though Energy Star recommends that you put this in your energy policy, I'm going to recommend that you put in the guidelines. And we'll talk about the energy guidelines here in just a quick second. But communicate the policy to all staff and employees, encourage them to get involved, and also consider partnering with Energy Star for your energy policy. And this is hot off the press if you didn't see this in the news yesterday, but it's possible that the Energy Star program is going to be closed down, or it's going to go through an evolution. One of the headlines in the news yesterday was that this was one of the consequences of the effort in the government to reduce costs And so you might keep an eye on this, and you might also go to the Energy Star website pretty quickly and get these policy and guidelines, because I don't know how much longer the Energy Star website and activities will remain available online. It's a big question mark.
Yeah, and hey, just chiming in here. I did post the guidelines and download links in the chat, so you can always Google them, and they're easy to find until who knows when. But the links are there if you want to go ahead and snag those.
Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. All right, so let's transition and have a conversation a little bit about energy guidelines. Once again, I wanted to just step back a little bit and have you see the difference between the energy policy and the energy guidelines. So the policy, again, is this overriding high-level statement about what the organization intends to do. But I want to encourage you to develop these energy guidelines, where the energy guidelines will detail more items. I think the guidelines have to consider things like building temperature targets, the way the buildings are going to be operated and managed throughout the course of the year. So if you can picture a room of people, as we've described, this energy committee gets together, they talk about what the goals are, and then we got to talk about how are we going to operate the buildings? What temperatures are reasonable within my organization for the business that I have? One of the biggest things that I want to caution you against, the most obvious thing that people want to talk about and think, hey, we can save energy if we just simply change building temperatures, either up or down, depending upon either your heating or cooling or what have you. It is the single biggest thing that I think causes people to really struggle with their energy improvement efforts, is people try to be overly aggressive with temperatures. And I want to caution you against that. What I would say, as this energy committee comes together and considers guidelines, considers temperatures that are reasonable. And what I would say, my recommendation, if you were to ask me the question, hey, Tom, what would you suggest is the right temperature, maybe for cooling? I would say the right cooling temperature, having worked in hundreds of different buildings, a temperature that seems to keep most people comfortable is 72 degrees. Energy Star is going to recommend that you cool to 74. And in parts of the country, cooling to 74 might be very reasonable because of humidity changes that might be in one part of the country as compared to another. But all that being said, the number that seemed to show up most of the time, where I feel most people are pretty doggone comfortable, is 72 degrees for cooling. For heating, I would recommend 70. Could you get by with 68? Maybe. But I want to reiterate the fact you don't want to get hung up establishing temperature guidelines or targets that are going to cause people to be uncomfortable, because people right away will become they're going to offer feedback that's going to make your job much, much harder. You don't want to get stuck in the weeds right out of the box. As a guiding principle, as you write these guidelines, is you want to keep them simple and easy to understand and reasonable. I want to reiterate this fact about safety and human comfort and productivity cannot be compromised. Keep in mind, any recommendations that are put in the energy guidelines, the facilities department is going to reject them right away if they're going to be a safety concern, if it's going to cause people to be uncomfortable, or if it's going to compromise productivity. So start from a place understanding where that facility professional is coming from and say, okay, this is important to this person. Let's come up with things that are reasonable. I want you to think about these energy guidelines as the rules of the road or the rules of engagement. Why I like to frame it this way is, in order for you 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, if you're able to measure your impact, you have to measure it against something. And so by establishing these guidelines for temperature, for the way maybe you're going to irrigate your properties or the spaces you have on your campuses, and many other things that we'll continue to discuss in the next few minutes, you need to have them written down someplace so that you can measure against them moving forward. And it also gives people the ability to talk about them, whether it's the right solution, whether it's the wrong solution. And they have to be in writing. They have to be part of a formal document that can be shared and communicated and discussed in order for people to agree on what's best. The energy guidelines need to set expectations. They should set expectations for every level within an organization, from the leadership team and the people who are working in desk jobs to people that are doing other jobs. Custodians cleaning buildings, people that are working outside. There are many jobs and many organizations that want to improve energy efficiency. The guidelines simply have to match that organization and what people's responsibilities are. I wanted to indicate once again these Energy Star guidelines for energy management. The document that I referenced a few minutes ago has all of this in that document. It's actually a 40-page document that Daniela was talking about. So take a look at that. You'll see there's energy policy there, as well as some of these recommendations, some guidelines. And another mindset that I'd offer to you is don't turn the guidelines into a list of exercise. Why I say that is I want you to consider this as a possibility. We all seem to get through the holiday season and show up at January 1st with a renewed effort to lose weight. And so as we consider the possibility of losing weight, we consider different exercise programs, we look at different diet strategies. And what I'd offer is many of us struggle to lose weight because the list of exercises is not in and of itself the thing that is going to help you to solve the problem. Yes, you have to have targets, and yes, you have to establish some expectations, but it can't be like a list of exercises that you know it's out there and you don't take it serious, and so you struggle to lose weight. This has to be very actionable, and it has to be reasonable. It looks like, Mike, you raised your hand. You have a question or a thought? Daniela, can you help me with that?
Yes, let me see how I can give him access. Hold on. View. What? Hang on. Sorry, guys. Michael Hoffman. Okay, we're allowing you to talk, Mike. Beware, everybody. Mike, what's up?
That
Am
was
I-
actually totally an accident. I misclicked. I apologize.
Well, hello. Thanks for chiming in. All right. Anyone else? Actual question or hand raisers? I know we have some Q&A, but we might hold those till the end. Yeah, so I think, Tom, we do have some questions, but if you want to wrap up, we'll have plenty of time to go through those.
Perfect. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. What I want to do is talk a little bit more about these energy guidelines and things that I think have to be considered as part of these guidelines. One of the things that many people don't realize is a really tough thing is defining occupancy. And I want to explore this a little bit with you so you understand better what I mean by this. Many people would argue, well, if somebody's in a building, the building's occupied, so therefore the building has to run and HVAC has to be turned on. What I would argue, and the position that I take, is most buildings, particularly very large buildings, are very expensive to operate if there's limited occupancy. So let's just suppose, for my example, you have a 100,000 square foot building with 3 people in it. So you have 100,000 square feet, 3 people in it, and maybe you're air conditioning the building in the middle of July. Now, I understand that building, maybe it's being cleaned, maybe it's being serviced. It really depends upon what the activities are that are taking place in the building. But you have to consider, if you're really serious about saving energy and trying to become more efficient, is considering, is that building technically occupied? Should the occupants that are in that building in it, it's probably going to depend upon what their responsibilities and their goals are, the things that they're trying to get done. But is that building technically occupied? I think you can make an argument yes in some cases, and I think you can make an argument no in other cases. But in establishing these energy guidelines, I think that Energy Committee has to consider that very seriously. How are we going to define occupancy for a building? Does a building need to be 50% occupied with people? Does it need to be 80% occupied? There's no right answer to this, but it needs to be decided because the people that are making decisions for turning systems on and off, HVAC running or not running, is going to be based on whether it's occupied or not. And so it has to be an important discussion that's considered in part of the guidelines. As a domino effect to that, it's the HVAC scheduling. So once a building is occupied, then it triggers how are we going to schedule the building. And another thing to consider is, let's suppose a building is defined as occupied at 8 o'clock in the morning. How are we going to run the HVAC? Do we want the HVAC to run hours in advance to make sure the building is the right temperature well in advance of occupancy? Or do we want the HVAC to run and reach the right temperature as the building is being occupied? What I would say is, it's not a simple question to answer, but everybody that's part of this committee has to decide on how they're going to go about it. And if an organization wants to be more aggressive and look to save more money, then I think you want to keep things tighter. But if it's important for an organization to keep things more comfortable or running in ways that there's less risk, then that's understandable, but it should be discussed and thought about in order to move forward correctly or reasonably. Next item is temperature set points. I beat that up a few minutes ago. Another item here is lighting control. What are you going to do with lights? If a building is partially occupied, interior lights, do you want to have people turning lights on and off? Do your facilities at this point have motion sensors so lights automatically go on and off? How are you going to set the motion sensors? If there's no activity for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, should the lights go off? Is that a safety concern? There's all sorts of questions that can pop out of this and concerns that people could have. So it needs to be discussed, and an organization needs to put together a plan. What about humidity control and indoor air quality? What does that look like? Once again, this can change very dramatically depending upon where you're at in the country. Are you in Florida where humidity levels are high? Or are you someplace in the north where maybe the bigger concerns are about how cold it gets and freezing pipes? It's less about humidity and it's more about things freezing and damage to the building. So consider all of those things, think it through and discuss how it needs to be documented so it can be tracked. Another item is custodial functions. What does that look like? Let's take the example of a school to just give you an idea of an organization that goes through a unique period of time like this summer. Not every organization will do that, but schools, in most situations, students are away from the buildings for 10 weeks in the summer. Well, there's an opportunity to save there, but what happens with custodial functions? Do custodians clean those buildings differently in the summer? Yes, I mean, I think there's an opportunity there to save. My short answer would be yes, but what that looks like is going to change depending upon an organization. So consider custodial functions. They're unique. And what I'd also say is many times something I've learned is an organization doesn't consider cleaning the buildings as one of its priorities necessarily. And I would argue it has to be. In order for custodial functions to move along smoothly and efficiently, it's got to be part of the overall picture and part of the plan. And in this meeting, once again, with these committee members is the time to talk about that. So it can be, you can identify the best path forward. Irrigation control, what does that look like? How green do you want the grass to be? What is it? How does that change in Florida or change in California or change in Iowa? It has to be specific to where you're at, and it might also change based on what your cost structure is, your irrigation costs and water costs. And so consider that, and again, put together a plan that makes sense based on what's reasonable. And I would finish this by saying every organization has unique challenges and unique considerations. This document, this energy guideline document, has to take everything into account. And that's why, back to my recommendation, bringing all these people together in one spot gives people the chance to share those ideas, consider them, and document what needs to be on paper for the success of the organization. So as we round out the last couple slides in the presentation, one of the things that I want to talk about is this energy savings culture. If you were part of a previous webinar, I beat this up a little bit, but just to remind a few things here is that an energy savings culture is so vitally important to the overall success of any energy reduction effort. The staff needs to be educated, and the financial impact of little things like lights and computers and other small stuff has to be considered, and people have to have an appreciation of what they are. I want to offer just a couple simple examples of things just so you can see how I have in the past tried to help people understand how little things can add up to be bigger things. A computer, and recognize too, these are approximations. I'm sure somebody who's paying attention to the webinar would challenge some of the numbers that I have here. And so I respect that and I get that, but I'm also trying to approximate some things so people can see the financial benefit of this. And so please recognize what I'm about to offer, just roughly an approximation of costs based on size and all of the other variables that might be involved. So starting with computers, roughly a computer that's turned on with its monitor operating costs roughly $0.25 per day. And so if it costs $0.25 per day and it needs to be used because it's in some type of office space or classroom space or something of the like, it probably has to be on for 10 hours a day in order for the job to be done. So it's going to cost you a dime. What I would argue is the other 15 hours a day are an opportunity for you to save the 15 cents. And obviously I'm approximating, I know it's a 24-hour day, not a 25-hour day. But you get the idea. The idea is you have to coordinate getting that computer turned off, talk with the IT department, put strategies together to power things down. But that one device multiplied by tens or hundreds of different computers around an organization can begin to have an impact pretty quickly if you realize that every one of them might be an opportunity to save a dime a day or 15 cents a day, depending upon how they're being used. Another example would be lights. Certainly there's lots of lights out there, lots of different size spaces. So I want to give you an idea of just what lights cost approximately. And let me use, we've all been in classrooms. A typical classroom may be about 1,000 square feet to give you a feeling of size. So 1,000 square feet, if you're trying to light it under normal conditions with normal lighting levels, it probably costs about a dime an hour to keep the lights on. And so if you're working in office space, that's roughly half the size of a classroom, a typical classroom, it's probably going to cost you about a nickel an hour to keep the lights on. And like I say, that nickel or that dime, that small amount of money seems so trivial until you start to multiply it out and think about the buildings that you have, the multiple buildings and multiple spaces and all of the square footage an organization might have. So lights aren't trivial. Yes, LED lights are way more efficient now than lights of the past, but they do have an impact. And so consider that. And once again, the nugget here is a classroom of lights costs about a dime an hour to operate. The last item that I'd like to offer you is just a nugget with water. Somebody might ask the question, well, how much does water cost? And again, rates are going to change all around the country, but I'd give you this is typical or normal, if that's a better word, is a gallon of water that flows through and into a building and maybe out into the sewer through a toilet or through a sink. Usually when you talk about incoming water costs and outgoing sewer costs, each gallon costs you about 1/3 of a penny. If you multiply that out and say, okay, so 3 gallons cost me a penny, that's what you're looking at. And if you say turn on a sink or run a faucet for several minutes, you're going to end up, it's going to cost a penny. But if you consider all the faucets, all the sinks, all the things that are consuming water, even though it seems like such a small amount of money, that's where it begins to add up. So again, just to summarize, a gallon of water on average around the country costs you about 1/3 of a penny for a gallon of water. So circling back to this idea of the energy savings culture, educate staff. People need to know things. Calculations need to be done and shared so people can have an appreciation for the benefit of turning things off. And most people will get on board. It might take some time, but most people will get on board. Encourage behaviors out of the office. And what I mean by that is help people become more aware of energy costs. And hopefully people can take that information home with them in order to save some money at their own houses. So encourage those behaviors, take them home. Be transparent. As this energy committee comes together and starts to use data and success is happening, be transparent. Let people see the success. So make that part of the culture. Pat people on the back. People need to feel appreciated. People need to know that their efforts are worthwhile. So there needs to be a recognition. There needs to be effort put into, whether that comes from the CEO or other people that are enthusiastic about saving energy. Pat people on the back, find ways to recognize people so that people see the value. And also recognize change takes time and patience. Most people need some time in order to adapt to new asks of them. People don't just spontaneously say, yeah, I like that idea. I'm just going to start changing all my behaviors. Think about your own routines. Think about the way you live your life and the way you function. And if we're honest with ourselves, and I always look at myself in the mirror first, I don't really like change all too much. I'm slow to change. Maybe it's part of who I am as a person, or maybe it's stage of life. But what I've learned is most people, I think, are in the same boat, where people need time and patience in order to change. And so as you set this goal and you create this culture, recognize patience is going to be a big part of it. Make sure you're sharing information and successes. I would recommend this energy committee get together with regularity. Once again, it's going to be different for every organization. It might be once a month, it might be once a quarter, but the energy committee needs to come together, meet regularly, discuss what's happened, maybe make modifications to the guidelines. If people are tracking information and and you've got data to show success or situations where you might be backtracking, through regular meeting and conversations, you get a chance to course correct and make sure that things are going the way they need to go. I'd encourage every organization to reinvest the savings. Usually, as things start to go better and better and better and savings starts to occur, it's exciting to reinvest those savings. It's a great opportunity for the CFO to show his or her support for this energy effort by turning that savings into things for the organization that people can see and benefit from. I'd recommend using dashboards or newsletters. Find the easiest, best ways, the ways that meet your organization's needs so that people can see what's happening day in and day out. Set goals. I always like the idea of establishing annual goals. And I don't think it's, well, let me say it this way. It's not easy in the beginning, the first year, to have a goal, because I don't think you know your organization necessarily well enough to set goals. But as time goes by, and as you look at more data and consider things, and you can make reasonable goals, set goals in order to hopefully incentivize and motivate people to achieve them. Another important part, and I want to go back to this chart that I had here on this came from the Energy Star website through the energy policy. And why I wanted to come back here is I think it's an important diagram about following up and the way an energy program needs to operate. One of the key things that becomes obvious in this diagram is the arrows, how things are circular, how it's saying create a plan, implement the plan, evaluate progress and recognize achievements, and it's a circle. This is the way improvement needs to take place. And that's what I wanted to say here is make sure you're following up with staff and closing the loop. I know in my own professional life, I was asked many times to do certain things and then never heard another thing about it. Weeks, months, years later. And it's as an employee, it gets frustrating when you are asked to do things and there's never any follow-up. Recognize it's another human behavior that people will get cynical or they just won't take things very seriously if there's no follow-up. So make sure as part of your strategy, part of your policy, part of your guidelines, you have to build in this idea of closing the loop and following up with people. My last thought here is, and this is my own little way that I remind people, is remain patiently persistent. The previous slide, I said it, and I'm saying it again because I know how important it is. You have to continue to push. Somebody has to be the force behind the engine in order to make these changes. But you have to be patient, yet you have to be persistent. And that's a clever little thing I like to use just to remind people. Patiently persistent is who's going to win the game. So as the presentation culminates, and certainly we'll get to your questions here in a second, I just want to talk about the data, how important the data is. The data is the link. It's the thing that's going to bring everybody together. And so Energy Cap has this single platform that brings energy managers, sustainability leaders, finance leaders together, because the data, when people can look at the costs and you can identify the weak links, the buildings that are underperforming and the opportunities, the data is going to tell the story. So know that whether Energy Cap is the right solution for you or some other type of, it may be a spreadsheet and maybe some other type of software that's out there, find the thing that's best for your organization and make sure that you make data a huge part of all of your efforts, because it's going to drive your actions moving forward.
Awesome. And I'll call this one out really quick. These, I know some of you, well, most people are always wondering if these are recorded. We record all of our webinars and they can be found on our website. It's pretty easy, energycap.com. In our menu bar, you go to resources and you can just select recorded webinars, and you can find all kinds of other fun things on our website. Like Tom said, thank you guys for being here. We have lots of questions. So Tom, I don't know if you want to pull up the Q&A tool, or I can also read them to you.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, so, and we did have some anonymous questions come in. If you guys want to identify yourself and or ask any follow-up questions, feel free to do so. Otherwise, feel free to remain anonymous. We had somebody ask, with a state like Washington, that has the Washington Clean Buildings Act. If ESPM is no longer available, how will we be able to be compliant with the law?
That is a
I know.
great question. I wish I had the answer for that. We in our industry are just very intrigued to see how this is all going to play itself out over the days and the weeks ahead. I think if there's going to be a change, my instincts are that this is going to happen maybe around July 1st, just knowing the cycles in government and such. So I think we maybe have a month or two that we have access to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. But this has very significant consequences to many people out there who use Portfolio Manager. And so if that is the tool that you're currently using to track all of your data, I would do a couple things. I would download that data. I think it's been a while since I've been in Portfolio Manager myself, but I think there are mechanisms for you to pull all that data out. So I'd have a safety net to make sure the data, you've got it. But I would pay very close attention to what's happening politically. And if you are forced to use some type of different solution in the future, at least you have your data that you could re-import and use it in some other type of tool.
Cool. And again, we're all alone in this together. So if anyone else has any other ideas, feel free to raise your hand or post it in the chat. Because yes, that was a very philosophical question, not one you can just answer off the bat. Okay, then we have another one. This is from Josh Miller. Developing an energy plan and energy management system is so important. How can facilities managers leverage utility-backed strategic energy management incentive programs to extend their teams, meet their goals, and drive towards ISO? I always forget how to say this. 50001.
Yeah, Josh, this it's a great question, one that I guess I've thought about, but I don't know that I've got a great answer in the sense that one of the things that it's a tricky part of navigating energy programs is many times to motivate people, what's driving them is saving money. And so if money is the goal, is to save money to become more efficient, sometimes the CFO and decision makers are not willing to use that money to incentivize people. And another theme that I think is pretty common is many times ESG professionals and energy managers, they have no authority over people within an organization. Usually they are not in management roles, they're in support roles. And I say that simply because it makes this game very tricky, because we really don't ever use the money to financially incentivize people or offer things to people for their compliance or their efforts. And at the same time, we can't really demand that people do X, Y, and Z either. And it puts us in this really unusual spot. And what I've learned after doing this for 20 years is the best way to navigate through this is you have to, again, approach it reasonably. You have to communicate your way through it. You have to be that bridge. You have to bring people together and use logic and reason. And many times people will come over time. They'll move to a better place. But I wish I had a better answer than that, but it's just what I've learned. It just seems as though the incentive things is hard. And if you come up with something else, or if anybody else is on the webinar now that could weigh in, I'd love to hear that. This is another one of the weak links I feel like I've seen over the years.
Well, thank you. Let's see. We have another question. Do you have advice for navigating the organization of an energy committee in a business that has relatively fragmented, siloed divisions?
Yeah. What I would say is similar to what I've mentioned during the thrust of the presentation, where I feel like you just got to get people in a room. What's interesting is I feel like most organizations, even though they physically might be close together, where the CEO sits within 10 yards of the CFO, there still seems to be a consistent theme of siloed functioning that happens within organizations. And so I think what you're experiencing very likely is not abnormal, even though in your situation, people might be separate and it might be a little bit harder. The theme is the same. I think people function in isolation. And so I think the solution is much the same as I've described. I think you have to invite people together, and maybe circling all the way back to the whole idea of the CEO leading the charge is, I really think if you are in a position to be the one to drive this, if you're an energy manager or an ESG professional, or you might be a facilities director who this is the passion. It's like you want to help the organization become more efficient. I feel like you really need to get support from the top. You need to win over that lead person. and so that they can help move the program forward. And in doing so, I think it will help bridge the gap with the fragmentation, or allowing people, maybe giving the excuse or the authority for people to come together for the purpose of this effort.
Awesome. And then we did have one more question that came through in the chat, which of course I'm not going to be able to find. Well, if anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and submit them. I did lose, I think there was one, but we may have answered it. So let us know. Tom, I don't think you have any further slides. I think it's just Q&A. We're seeing the resources and webinars and events slide. But I think we are wrapped up. Yep, look at that. Beautiful.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, also open to commentary. If anyone wants to raise their hand, I can give you access to speak if you want to tell Tom thank you, or if you have any criticism for him. He takes criticism very well. But awesome. We're getting some good feedback in the chat. So thank you, Tom, for pulling this together, sharing your wisdom. It seems to be helpful for our audience. So.
And thanks everybody for showing up. I know that we're going to be continuing more webinars in the next couple of weeks, so please keep an eye out for them. But thanks for everybody for tuning in. And please, find me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. Find me. I'm happy to engage with people. I'd love to help in any way possible. Or if you have feedback, ideas, ways that I can change my message, improve my message for others. I want to try to share information that's relevant and helpful to people through these webinars.
And yep, Madigan just posted Tom's LinkedIn. So if you guys want to go bombard him on there, that would be great. Wonderful. Well, thank y'all so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and we'll see y'all on the next webinar, and or check out Eco Champions if you want to keep communicating with some of the folks that are here. Have a lovely day. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Have a great day.